Great job, Dr. Hargrove. All that good history. My name is Pat Johnson, and I am one of the Black History Commissioners from Pocahontas, Arkansas. If you've never heard of that, it's Northeast Arkansas here. I'm going to be introducing Kelly Houston Jones. She is an Associate Professor of History at Arkansas Tech University. Her books, A Weary Land, Slavery on the Grounds in Arkansas, won the Arkansas Historical Association's John Williams Graves Award in 2022. She serves on Russellville Historic District Commission and is a member of Preserve Arkansas. Her research focused on American slavery, particularly in the Trans-Mississippi South. Her work has appeared in edited volumes such as The Lane Massacre in Arkansas, A Century of Atrocity and Resistance, Arkansas Women, Their Lives and Times, and Bullets and Fire, Lynching and Authority in Arkansas from Slavery through the 1930s. So let's all give Kelly a large welcome.
You know how to fill up your presentation?
My tablet here is kind of having a freak out, so I may have to go totally off the cuff, and that'll be all right. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah. I'm so happy to be here. There's a couple of things to say about this. One, obviously I'm white. Two, less obviously, I'm not originally from Russellville. So, however, I have been at Arkansas Tech since 2018, and by sitting on the Historic District Commission, where I mostly just learn, from other people, and a little bit of work with Rachel Patton with Preserve Arkansas, and some time with the Arkansas Historical Association, etc., I've had occasion to think about our area of the River Valley in these contexts of, the built environment and preservation and the importance of place and that kind of thing. Yeah, it says totally freaked out. Oh, my good juicy quotations. I'm not going to be able to read my good juicy quotations, but I think I can remember them probably pretty well. So let me start you with, so let me also say this. When I accepted my mission, to participate today, I didn't realize that the whole Russellville Lattimore Tourist Home posse was going to be here. And so I've got, which is great. So I've got a little bit about the Lattimore House in this presentation, but I promise to get in and get out and stay in my lane, and let you guys do what you do. So let me start with the story of an excursion train, is what people called it in the 19th century. This was a group of folks who came from Little Rock to Russellville in 1879, and I think I can give you February 16th, it did open up. February 16th, 1879, this was an excursion train, is what they call it. The Russellville newspaper reported on this. Now, let me remind you, the year, 1879. Slavery and the Civil War is like right in their rearview mirror, And they take the train out, this group of folks. The way the newspaper in Russellville described it was, quote, mostly members of the legislature, their sweethearts, and some citizens in the more quiet walks of private life. The party numbering about 75 or 100. They rode the train from Little Rock to Russellville, and they got into town about 11:30. And I think, looking up, I'm not an expert on the rail lines in Arkansas, but I think the depot they would have gotten on at would have been what we now call North Little Rock. I think it would have been what they would have called then Argenta. I think they would have gotten on that depot and then came to the depot in Russellville at the time, which is not the building that exists now in Russellville, the railroad depot that we have now, which is 19 teens something. this depot in Russellville, and I want to say somebody told me it's on the other side, but just like right on the other side of the tracks in Russellville. So that building, and this matters to me because I'm going to show you the depot we have now, that building. So the one they're arriving at, though, in Russellville doesn't exist anymore. So they get to Russellville about 11:30 in the day, pretty big group, okay? And then they, quote, scattered out and took a stroll through our town. At noon, they had a meal at what the newspaper called Wooten and Davis's Eating House. I love how in the 19th century they're either way too like sort of floral in the way to describe something, or they just get right to the point. Okay, this is an eating house, Wooten and Davis's, and it says that the way they describe it, it makes me think that it's either kind of attached to the depot or like right next to it, or something like that. So they have this big lunch, and look, the newspaper editor is super proud of their meal. Quote, all hands partook of a dinner possessing all the culinary excellence necessary to gratify the most dainty, the most substantial, the most champagneical, or the most any other kind of appetite that these folks would have had. So it sounds like this dining area is kind of like right there, like sort of attached to or right next to the depot, and they're eating, they're enjoying, they're relaxing. It's an excursion after all. And then at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they head back to Little Rock. According to the newspaper, quote, all well pleased, we believe, with their jaunt. Now, there's a few things to ask here. Who are these people? And what's the point, okay, of this trip? So one of the things that I want to tell you is that Russellville is still a pretty new city at this time. So incorporated, according to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, June 7th, 1870, although I think I've heard someone say 1871 before, but maybe I just kind of like got that year stuck in my head. And so I think today is actually Russellville's birthday, right? Is today the 7th? So June 7th, 1870, Russellville is established. So if you're taking an excursion train to Russellville in 1879, then you're coming up on a city that's growing, it's new, they really want people to think well of them, right? And they want people to come and visit, and of course, spend some money. So, although Russellville's established a few years earlier, 1873 is when the railroad comes through, and so that's what's really going to inject that growth and that life and that economic sort of blood into the town. So it's pretty young. I think at this point there's probably about 1,000 people living in Russellville, maybe 20 or so stores clustered around that center. And so the newspaper is really wanting to kind of be like a booster for this. Put the town's best foot forward. The other thing I want to point out here with this excursion is that we're talking about legislators, we're talking about political men, and the women who come with them on excursions, and that might, for the uninitiated, okay, it might make you assume that these are all white people, right? Guess what? They're not. This is a time where Arkansas still had, there's that slim chapter there, and I'm going to try not to do the professor thing and go off on this whole Reconstruction, like lecture, but there's this short window of time there where there were black men in our state house, certainly at the county level, okay? And when that changes, it takes years, okay? It doesn't change overnight, but this is that moment where it really looks like the alternate future of what Arkansas and the rest of the former Confederacy could have been. Like, this is when you can see it, okay? This is that moment where things could have been different. So I want to name off a couple of these folks. William Furbish was on this excursion. A county clerk from South Arkansas, J. Penoyer Jones. Representative Richard A. Dawson. These are some of the folks that were there according to the newspaper editor. In Arkansas, between 1868 and 1893, at least 87 African American men were elected to and served in the Arkansas General Assembly. And then, of course, election to different sort of state offices related to the state government and certainly that county level as well. So this was an integrated group of folks taking an excursion from Little Rock to little old Russellville, brand shiny new Russellville, Arkansas. Now, if you look at the history of the organization, this is just a random train to help you think about this, okay? This is not a this is just a train. This is from the Butler Center digital photos. If you think about the history of how the rail travel was organized before it was officially segregated, the convention was, and I don't have any proof that the train that they rode from Little Rock to Russellville was set up exactly this way, but we know that the convention was to have the ladies' car and the smoking car. You guys, has anybody heard of this before? It's just one of those situations where some people are going to know way more about this than I do, and some people I'm telling you something new, right? So I'm trying to sort of hit in the middle here. The ladies' car was like the civilized, we're going to behave ourselves car, okay, on the train. Men could ride on the ladies' car, but they had to be accompanying a woman. So you could get on there with your wife, okay, your daughter, okay, that kind of thing. The smoking car was for men. Ladies did not ride in the smoking car. And so some of the earliest segregation attempts were actually trying to put black women on the smoking car, which says two things. One of them, certainly one is about race. The other is saying that black women aren't really women the way that white women are women, right? And so that's some of the early sort of tensions with this. But I suspect that, because again, this is 1879, I suspect that these people, depending on what sort of cluster of the group within this 75 to 100 folks, some of them are in the ladies' car and some of them are in the smoking car. The smoking car was, obviously they're smoking, but, they're cussing, they're talking about stuff, that they would talk about without women around and that kind of stuff. That's kind of the idea, is that you keep that kind of behavior in its own car, okay? And you keep ladies out of it. So that's how I suspect this trip may have gone. Now, when the editor writes about this excursion to Russellville, he doesn't distinguish, only if you know the names like Furbush, for example, and only when you kind of go another column over and down to the bottom and he kind of describes some of the specific people who came, who were part of this group. That's the only time you get an indication of race, that some of these folks, some of these legislators, some of these politicians were black. And so I also suspect that they had that meal in a relatively integrated way. I'm not claiming that everybody's at the same table. Certainly it's going to take several tables to accommodate that many people. But that group came to Little Rock together. They came to Russellville from Little Rock together. They scattered, okay, and sort of enjoyed what Russellville had to offer, had a meal, and then got back on that train and took off, okay, back to Little Rock. So let me then kind of use that to introduce my theme of rest, recreation, relaxation as resistance. And I'm pulling that, I'm not a theorist of leisure in society. But reading folks who do that and who for them that is their subfield, there are some things that they tell us about to help us kind of analyze these types of incidents or these types of situations. One is that rest has effective meanings like love, safety, and healing. Although whites had historically stereotyped black folks as lazy, presenting black bodies only as valuable through their labor or productive output, yet there are glimpses of black life outside of imagery that far too often depicts black suffering and pain. And when we focus on leisure, rest, and play, we're able to see black folks playing, lounging, and bonding through the communal healing act of rest. And that's a quotation from one of the scholars who does this subfield for a living. To quote another, expressing black joy is a radical and subversive act in itself. Challenges for our time mainstream media is what she's talking about here, but I would also argue that this could be the case for studying history as well. Challenges imagery that fixes black people and black life in a position of death and despair. Asserts that black people are fully human, capable of experiencing and expressing a full dynamic range of emotions. Capture, share, and circulate expressions of black life without concern for the white gaze. Now, certainly, okay, and to put it simply, there must be space for other possibilities of blackness that don't center entirely on death, suffering, and victimhood. And so certainly that's part of the story, but there's a movement in the scholarship right now, and you can actually kind of see this on social media as well. And this, maybe I may have been the last person to discover this, but if you've seen on social media the NAP ministry, is a social media movement to celebrate, it's usually specifically black women, at rest. Taking time to relax is resistance to a whole number of isms out there that are working on in people in very subtle kinds of ways. So I want to take that general theme of considering rest, recreation, leisure, relaxation in a way that helps us kind of understand what folks are up against and the ways that they push back against that. Now, certainly these black politicians in 1879 are hyper aware of the fact that people are watching them very closely for signs that they either are worthy of this new ability to partake in formal politics, and there are certainly, folks watching for evidence that they're not worthy of that. So anytime they leave the house, they're paying attention, right, to any sort of signals that it might look like that they're sending. But when these visitors to Russellville show up and have this excursion, they're asserting a public leisure that was impossible under slavery. And this, again, something that's right there in the rearview mirror. But now, within 15 years, such a trip would be unthinkable. The separate coach law of 1891 in Arkansas established the segregation of rail travel by race. It also, as you guys know, that stretched to waiting in the depot itself, right? When plumbing and bathrooms come in, they're doing all of that as well. So really, that separation in travel and leisure is going to come in and entrench itself. And by the way, comes at the same time as the election quote reform of 1891. So these things come together, right? And so not only do you have the disintegration of black formal political activity being codified, right, and sort of being pushed along by that election law of 1891, the separate coach law as well. And so the everyday life is certainly going to be affected as well. And the reason I wanted to kind of really dig in with that is to remind us, even if we know it, I think it bears repeating often, that segregation wasn't something that was just a, quote, way of life that always existed, and then, to get rid of it is to, uproot something that's always been there. Segregation was carefully constructed. It had to be made, it had to be created, and it had to be reinforced in order to survive. And so in order to get rid of it, it has to be deconstructed, right? And so these are things that people do, not something that just happens to us. And so then that context of leisure and segregation gets us to the how do black Southerners or other black Americans who are passing through the South or visiting relatives in the South, how do they navigate that once this system becomes so entrenched and so inelastic? And my next slide here is a view of downtown Russellville, Main Street looking west. If you're not familiar, Russellville, we're about midway between Little Rock and Fort Smith. That's a pretty decent explanation, I think, of us. And so here's the old, my people call the old highway, but this is 64, this is Main Street, Russellville, to just kind of give you a little sense of this. Now the first, and so this is where the story of the Green Book comes in, and I promise I'll just do my little thing here so that way my theme makes sense, and then I'll move on. The Green Book, as many folks in here know, was a guide to help Black vacationers or travelers. Like, we know that sometimes you're traveling to another place because somebody's sick, if there's some care that's needed, there's something that needs attended to. So sometimes there are more urgent, sort of pressing things going on, but sometimes this is, actually a vacation. Sometimes this is a family sort of tourist trip. So the regime that I just described, coming in with, really starting with a separate coach law, but then morphing, coming to all of these other situations, restaurants, you guys know the story, all of these sort of public places. It makes the South, Arkansas included, so barren in hospitality for African Americans. I should say public, right, hospitality for African Americans traveling through, that something like the Green Book is going to help them know what establishments can I safely stop at, whether to eat, to get fuel, to stay the night, okay, whatever the case might be. I think, so this is the 1939 Green Book. This is just pulled from the Schomburg Center's digital collections on this. You can flip through these like a book. This is the first one that I have seen, and again, I'm just like I'm on just the outskirts of this, looking in, but this one is the first one that I've seen that Russellville is included in, and let's see if I can point it out for you. So it's on the bottom, if I can. So here's Russellville. There's the home lot, the Jackson house on. And then you've got to go to the top of Blackmore house. Okay, and so the point that I want to make with this is that we've got this place in the River Valley that's one of the few places where, if you're unfamiliar with the area and you're driving through with your family and are subject to Jim Crow segregation, this is one of the few places that you could know that you could safely stop, okay? And there's two things going on here. This is support for Black families by other Black families. And it's also kind of a reminder of how tourism both benefits the tourist, okay, and again, there's other things going on, but assuming that this is just kind of a road trip, okay, for a family, benefits them if they're finding a safe place, and then certainly it might help them make their plans for the next time they come through or whatever the case might be. But it's also, these kinds of situations also allow for a little bit of side income for that family, okay, who opens their home to people passing through. And so you've got the ability to spend your dollars as a traveler with someone who actually cares about your safety. So there's that sort of like added benefit as well. So I'm gonna button up on that though, because we've got a whole presentation on this. And so then I'm going to move to, and this is the same era in the 1930s, I'm going to move to another project in Russellville. You guys are going to hear about the Lattimore Tourist Home Preservation Project. We've got another one in Russellville going on that I think fits this theme, and it's the reclamation of stories related to the city pool, which is now part of the, I'm going to call it kind of like the campus, the sort of city complex that includes the River Valley Art Center. So the building that went with that pool, the pool's covered up, but the building that went with that pool, and then there's the city park next to it, this whole kind of like setup. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, what our friends in Russellville have been doing on this, but first just a little bit of context, okay, for this pool. This was a pool set up by the city of Russellville using New Deal funds. The first conversations about the creation of this pool came, the first source of federal funds, I should say, that they were talking about was the PWA. And then as the New Deal evolves, they're asking the WPA for funds to support the creation of this pool. There's a whole lot of WPA pools out there in Arkansas and beyond. Some of them still exist, some of them don't. You can find a lot of them on the National Register of Historic Places. The sort of interesting irony from where I'm sitting about the WPA in projects in Arkansas and related to this pool in particular is that the New Deal, I'm doing the same sort of popping of the microphone. The New Deal was created to get Americans through the Depression. The WPA both blocked Black citizens from benefiting from some of the projects that come out of that effort, but then sometimes employed them on those projects, only a handful. The WPA employed people to do all kinds of things. They had all sorts of projects. One of them was the interview effort of formerly enslaved people. So some of the most important sources we have for what we think we know about slavery in Arkansas comes from the Writers Project within the WPA. At the same time, this is the same project they're writing, these same folks are writing the checks to then create public structures, like the pool I just mentioned, where Black citizens of that city aren't allowed to swim. So there's kind of two things going on at once with that. And so the history of the city pool in Russellville, the one that's covered up now, that WPA pool, is the history of that odd tension, okay? One of the things that I noticed looking into the lead up to the creation of the pool was that the leadership in bringing this project to Russellville was white society in the city. Was the Chamber of Commerce, known for its banquets and kind of elite sort of fundraising things, the movers and shakers of town, the Lions Club. These are the folks who are meeting. Society, white society in the city of Russellville was meeting, thinking about ways that they could get a cooperation between WPA, the WPA and the city to create this pool. And they describe all of the benefits of the pool, and they really lean on the description of youth in the city. Wouldn't it be great for the kids to have a place to relax, right? And in their mind, from what I can tell and from what I've read related to other New Deal projects, in their mind, it's no question that it's going to be a whites-only project. Now, it comes with, and I don't know exactly the extent, I don't know what the sort of city park landscape looked like in Russellville at this time, but it comes with the creation of at least some work, either creating or doing something to improve the city park. And this pool cost $24,000. And it opened on July the 16th, 1936. $24,000 in 1936 could have done a whole lot of good for a whole lot of people in Russellville who had bigger problems than I don't have anywhere to swim, okay? So that's kind of the beginnings of that, the history of that space for white recreation. But what I've got pictured here is supposed to represent a project that we've got folks doing in Russellville. This is the Arkansas Art Center project. We've got, and I don't see her here, but Dexta Rodriguez interviewing folks about once that pool was opened up, she's trying to find people. I think she told me 60 and over, right? That's the age group, that she's really targeting, looking for stories about the pool. She's also got kind of an art angle. It's a memory project. She's got all this great work that she's doing. And what I think I understand is that this kind of, her role in the pool project, she's not, a one-man band here, but her role in the pool project really grew out of her dissertation research. And I think I understand that she's defending in August. So we'll be calling her Dr. Rodriguez soon. And I think the documentary is supposed to be ready for viewing in September. So anyways, early fall, end of summer is when we're going to see, a lot of the fruits of this. So I really wanted to do a commercial for that project, especially considering that they received funds from the Black History Commission to work on this really valuable, really worthy thing related to rest and recreation in Polk County. Okay, and so then I want to take us back to the depot. And I've got sort of one other kind of thing to talk about here on this theme of places and spaces in Russellville and rest and recreation and those activities as resistance, as affirmation. This is an older photo of the depot that exists now in Russellville. And this was also a segregated space for a very long time, okay, like the original depot would have been. But now, this depot is a place where if you want to come to the sort of official City of Russellville Juneteenth event, this is kind of like the physical space, this and the stage, kind of like the physical space that really anchors that. So this space that represented the barriers that come into place at the turn of the century, now we can think of as one part of the longer, deeper history of emancipation celebrations in Russellville. And of course, we've got Mr. Hendricks here, who is very involved in that history of Russellville. I want to, though, add a little bit of context for that. In Arkansas, especially considering the time of year, that we're in Arkansas, the earliest occurrence in the newspaper of a Juneteenth event that I have seen is 1900. Obviously, it's older than that, okay? And I think the specific paper that I'm thinking about, the Arkansas Gazette, is like, it's by white people for white people. So they're not always reporting on everything that's going on. But by the time that article shows up, there is a practice of celebrating emancipation in Arkansas 3 times a year, all across the state. One of them, and this is one of the oldest ones, is January 1st for the Emancipation Proclamation. Philander Smith University hosted some of the oldest of these. Their Lincoln Club started early and kept it up, and they had very organized January 1st emancipation celebrations. The other one that I think is going to be well known is Juneteenth, although people weren't always describing it that way in the sources that survive, so sometimes it gets kind of hidden, right? They'll just say Emancipation Day sometimes, but when you see the date, right, that you're looking at a Juneteenth celebration. Those celebrations, by the time you get to the 19-teens, January 1st and June 19th are dates that are pretty commonplace. You could find in a given town, especially Little Rock, you could find that there's multiple in one city. Hit multiple Juneteenth events, okay? And then in January, you could do the same thing for Emancipation Day and hear people read the Emancipation Proclamation and talk about current events to go with that. But there was a third one. Who knows when the third, look, I'm doing it too. Who knows when the third date was that Arkansans and other folks too are celebrating emancipation in Arkansas? It's the first week of August. This would have been really just common, wouldn't lift an eyebrow, okay, if you asked somebody about this around 1900. The first week of August was, and let me see, maybe make sure I get my quotation ready here. So the first week of August, so it connects to August 4th, 1834, when the British Empire gets rid of slavery in the British West Indies. Northern abolitionists in the 1830s knew about this, celebrated this, were excited about this, and had organized public acknowledgments of it, with the, assumption of we should be doing this too, right? Like, look at how much more civilized they are, than we are right now in the mid-1830s. And so after the Civil War, that celebration comes down to the South. as well. And in fact, the only emancipation celebration that I have been able to find so far that took place in Russellville in the older days, okay, not in recent, not in like living memory, was an August celebration. And 1885, the Russellville Democrat reported on an August celebration of emancipation. They celebrated on August 6th. Sometimes you pick whatever day, whatever, it might be whatever Friday or Saturday hits closest, to the date you're after. And the newspaper called it, quote, the Negroes' 4th of July, which is something you hear a lot about. People describe, Juneteenth that way as well, of course. So what's happening here is that they're celebrating something with this international consciousness of that battle of freedom over slavery, right? They're connecting themselves to the greater story of people who have experienced slavery and then the onset of freedom in the past. And so it really tells us something about them that they would connect to this. It also, to bring us back to our theme here, it also means that if I'm in Russellville, I'm partying 3 times a year to celebrate emancipation. Not 1, 3. So I might ride that train to Little Rock in January, might do my own thing in Russellville, in June. I guarantee there were some people in Russellville and surrounds getting on the train and going to not just Little Rock, but Fort Smith. Fort Smith had a pretty hoppin' Juneteenth scene, okay, in the 19-teens and 1920s too. And the railroads acknowledged this, and they had special, what they called excursion rates when you're coming up on these holidays to really take advantage of and encourage that kind of traffic, right? So then you've got this celebration of emancipation that comes with, yes, what I've tried to kind of sell you on is the theorists pose as the political nature of rest and relaxation. But if you're not sold on that, there is a more overt political aspect, right, to these freedom celebrations, these Emancipation Day celebrations as well. A lot of times when they get together, they're talking about current issues. One of the day celebrations, just our neighbor in Conway County, they drew up a petition to ask for what we would call reparations. They wanted a pension system for formerly enslaved people, and they took that chance to have a whole bunch of folks sign it. So there's that kind of more obvious political aspect to it's not just leisure. The leisure is never just leisure. It's also got a message, okay, that goes with it. And Russellville and the River Valley have always been a part of that. And so then that's why I just wanted to kind of end with the image of the depot we've got now. Once a pillar of the new order, right? When they passed these laws in 1891, they were creating a new order. They had to create the type of oppression that they wanted to see. The depot in Russellville now might, once a pillar of that, now it's a place that, again, nurturing a growing celebration of Juneteenth in our town, not new, but adding, right, to that long history of that celebration in the area. And with it embedded in the sometimes more overt, sometimes more covert political nature of recreation and leisure in the River Valley. Thanks. Y'all are too hungry to ask me any questions. Sure.
One observation I would make is in looking at the Green Book, a disproportionate number of those places where we could stay were run by women.
Exactly, right.
That
Yeah.
just struck me as so interesting because now women feel more vulnerable, but obviously they felt comfortable enough to house people that they may not even know.
Right. Okay, so the question is, how was the Green Book distributed? And they've got some sort of network, and I'm not the Green Book expert, so they've got subscribers, they've got a network, there's a lot of word of mouth, of course. Post them Well, no, I mean, it's not really that they're hiding when they stop in a Green Book site. It's just that they can trust that. The Green Book is telling them you can trust this place to welcome you safely. It's not that you're hiding. Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that if it's a hotel owner who's not going to allow black patrons, that hotel owner doesn't mind if black patrons go elsewhere. Does that make sense? But yeah, ask the Lattimore House folks, I guess.
I'm kind of sticking my neck out here, just about that much, with a little interesting story. I'm Mary Cahoon from Russellville, Arkansas. Been involved in restoration quite a while now in town. Worked on the saving the depot. Have some of my cohorts here. An interesting story, when the architect did the drawings for the building and then brought it to the city, no, that won't do. They had to flip the design because they had put the black people closer to downtown. So they had to flip it, get the blacks further away from downtown and put the white folks closer to town. And that's kind of connected. I don't know whether very many black folks use the railroad for recreation. I know it was, there are quite a few other stories that go with the use of the building that that I won't mention right now. Anyway, I think it's interesting that they had to redesign it in order to make it acceptable. Mm-hmm. About 1910, we have had to go with newspaper reports in order to try to date the current depot. You may have already read some of this stuff in your work now, but I think I like that story about flipping the building to get the proper mix of people. It's not really funny. I find it just unbelievable.
So a story about how the design was changed in order to make it more convenient for white travelers. Right. Yeah, more separation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Question,
right. I don't know that. I definitely wouldn't argue that the depot was kind of like a party center for them, but a place to consider they're passing through in order to take part in these other really meaningful experiences, as a family or a couple or whatever the case, might be.
Can you speak to, or can I guess anybody speak to the economic? Because with the depot, and then of course with the Green Book, those are also there's an economic story happening there where there are people who are traveling who are bringing their resources to spend with these, and I don't even know if these. I don't know if I can assume that these are black-owned businesses, and then I know for myself coming from Michigan, we had Idlewild, and then once we were able to go to certain places that we weren't able to go to, the economics shifted away from places like Idlewild, shifted away from black-owned spaces. Is there any data or any stories about that story, about the economic impact, or just how the economics changed from when we needed absolutely to use these places and then things kind of shifted?
I think for a place like Russellville with such a relatively low proportion of black citizens living there, you didn't have the situation like you find in some other places where it just makes a little bit more economic sense to open your business to black customers, even if it's in a kind of more humiliating, less service-oriented, sort of way. But as far as the other side, black businesses, I'm just not sure. That's one of the things that people who are interested in this, like, you know, like me and the table here in the middle, that's something we'd really like to know more about, is the extent of black business ownership in Russellville past, and it's been really hard. I think that if you took that question and pointed it at the Green Book, I think a lot of people would argue that those places, that's an economic lifeline for them to be listed and circulated in that publication. I'm not claiming that Mrs. Lattimore is like rolling in all this cash because, you know, but that is for people who can get listed and get, you know, regulars or a customer base, then that's a nice little bit of income that can really make the difference if you're struggling, you know, to make ends meet. Or especially for women and black women in particular, if there's just so few economic opportunities in the area anyway, you know, for you. But I think that would be the most important context for Russellville, is that it doesn't look like, you know, like Little Rock or Pine Bluff, or it's just a little bit of a different landscape.
We're going to take one last question before we break for lunch.
Okay, well, I'm the party girl. I want to know, the Negro celebrations, right? Why you guys give us 3? You know, for the January 1st to June 19th and the first week of August. Who decided that, were y'all just upset because of all them atrocities that was done and we needed 3? Or?
These were celebrations created by black people for black people. So I think I would look at it the other way. White people got 4th of July, and black communities said, no, we're doing January 1st, we're doing first week of August, and we're doing Juneteenth. Wow. And we know what we're doing July 4th too, I think is what they would, you know, also say. So it's an organic sort of ground up desire to celebrate these moments that matter so much, and to reflect. And what I see reported on these celebrations is that they'll reflect on what has happened since, you know, 1865 or 1863 or 1834, and sort of there's a lot of this theme of sort of how far we've come, you know, and then arguing for civil rights, sometimes in pretty direct ways, sometimes in just kind of showcasing in public how normal and civilized and, you know, worthy of equal rights these families are, just like everybody else. So, thanks. Thank you. Thank you.